So, Thurston County staff appears to be willing, along with the politicians, to lose and waste another $4 million on another building fiasco. What exactly is going on here? Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. So, as I mentioned earlier, Thurston County just is involved in this fiasco of a disaster. It's like a slow motion train wreck, clearly identifying that they're going to go off the rails here with at least a $4 million loss to start out with, or disappearing $4 million on another building fiasco. And of course, I think this video, we're going to talk about the players involved and exactly who the clowns are running this circus, again, doing something that is very predictably going to be a disaster for the taxpayers who live in Thurston County. And this is a lesson to watch and pay attention to because although I'm just talking about Thurston County, wherever you live, there are stories like this that tend to be going on in local government all over the place. You just need to pay attention and find out what's happening. So Thurston County, this is where I live. It happens to be one of the 39 counties in Washington State and the one where the state capital is located. So it's always interesting to see what happens here because what happens in Thurston tends to spread like a disease to the rest of the state because after all it is a seat of government and bureaucracy is oftentimes has a staph infection that just seems contagious and there's no way to stop it. So there's a long history, unfortunately, in Thurston County of making big and fairly cataclysmic mistakes when it comes to building disasters or poor choices when it comes to capital improvement projects. For example, I wrote an article many years ago that about Thurston County trying to build a jail. This was one that the voters had rejected multiple times, and so staff and the managers and the elected officials at the time decided that they would go and build it anyway. And so they spent about $62 million roughly at the end of the day building a jail that they actually didn't move into, couldn't even use. It sat empty for half a decade. In fact, they were roundly mocked by national news stories and all around the state as the example and the poster child of what not to do when it comes to actually building a jail or any other public facility for that matter. Now, they also, at the same time that they had this jail fiasco unfolding, Thurston County had another good example of a building that they called it the 3800 building, and this was another very poor choice. They had bought this building in the late 90s. They spent 18 years, spent $8 million on to take a $4 million empty building, a building that they never used, almost 2 decades of time, and they ended up selling it for a loss. I mean, they made every conceivable mistake that it seems like it's possible to make in dealing with a building that was, poorly chosen. They spent too much money on it. They never used it. It sat there empty forever, and they finally dumped it as just a money pit that it had become. And of course, they had converted part of the parking lot into a homeless camp too. So there was that. But Thurston County is not satisfied and never has been satisfied just with making single disasters when it comes to this type of approach. They just seem to repeatedly keep doing this over and over again. Partially it's because staff does seem to lie. I've written many articles about some of these other stories they've had in the past, an effort, a really bad one, where they were going to build a courthouse on some kind of a boondoggle scheme in downtown Olympia, the state capital, in almost the worst place that they could find. And just this push that staff had at the time that they had to get this building done no matter what. And the bill on it kept increasing. It was about a $422 million project before the whole thing finally collapsed and died right before COVID, when COVID kicked in. At least in Washington State, the voters were going to have a say on a debt fiasco and a debt bomb that was that large before the staff and the elected officials could go ahead with it. So fortunately for the people who live in Thurston County, this idea collapsed and it didn't end up materializing. But it wasn't because they didn't try. It took a lot of effort to push back on that and to change things. Which really brings us to the story that I'm talking about today, because it would be impossible for me to be able to even talk about this if we didn't have some local citizens here, in particular a guy named John Pettit, who has done yeoman's work in digging up the background and the information on exactly what's going on in this project. And if it wasn't for him staying focused, going to public hearings, digging up public records, paying attention to all of the various facets of some of these projects, the people of Thurston County would be in far worse shape. And everybody needs somebody like John Pettit to be in their community to be able to talk about these issues and do the research on them and to be able to expose the truth about what's happening. So essentially, this story really starts out with Thurston County just wants more room for staff. Of course, like all bloated bureaucracy, Thurston County's growing, and they want to have more places to put their staff. They've been buying some buildings and filling them up, but of course, it's never enough, and they're always looking for more, and the fancier and the more exotic the building, it seems like the more likely it is that they can do it. And in particular, after the $422 million courthouse scheme collapsed in 2020, then the staff decided, let's hatch a new plan. So they decided to lease this old building. People have been around a while know it's the old Ernst Hardware building, which is renamed the Atrium, located on Pacific Avenue, which is really all the way across the city of Olympia from where the current courthouse is located. And this is kind of what it looks like from Google Maps. You can see it here. Again, you can still see the old, what it looks like as an old hardware store. And today what it looks like is this. I actually took this, had a friend take this photo this morning. So this is exactly what it looks like, as current a photo as I could get, in an unusually bluebird clear sky this morning. So we were fortunate about that. And this is what it looks like today. And this is the building that they've decided, let's move a whole bunch of our staff into this facility. And that's been kind of the current plan. Now, this building and this property was originally purchased by a Kirkland developer just a couple years ago, 2019, for $4.5 million. So it's not a cheap piece of property, but at the same time, if you look at right now, it's currently assessed for $6.3 million. So it's increased in value, and they have been doing some work on this facility. And Thurston County's current plan is to spend about $2.5 million, somewhere between $2.4 million, $2.7 million to lease this building on an annual basis. So that's a pretty darn good return for a developer that just bought this building for $4.5 million a while ago and probably put some money into it. But the reason why, just so people know, originally after it had been Ernst Hardware, this was the location of the State Patrol, one of their headquarter buildings, and also the Department of Liquor and Cannabis Control. So the liquor board and all that had been located there. They moved away because of the nearby homeless camp issue and the problems with parking that they had in this facility, which is funny because Thurston County claims they're trying to get it to relieve some of the parking at the current building, but Thurston County's choices and decisions rarely make any sense, and that's what they're doing right now. So currently, Thurston County, though, this is where the story really gets interesting, and what's really raised a lot of red flags in this case, is that Thurston County, in addition, is planning to put, and has a contract for, an additional $6.1 million worth of tenant improvements, which means they're gonna take a building that's maxed out value, even the inflated value that Thurston County assessor typically assigns to it of $6.3 million. They're gonna be basically putting almost the same amount of value and money back into it to do a bunch more tenant improvements on this building, which is a good deal if you own the building. And so keep in mind, so it's valued at 6.3. They're going to spend roughly $2.5 million a year in leasing it, and they're going to spend another $6.1 million right away on a bunch of tenant improvements. However, one of the problems is that that owner of that building has had to go out and get a permit to do these same tenant improvements that Thurston County claims that they want. And that permit is a public record. You can actually pull it up, and we did. And it's only $2.2 million to do that particular series of improvements. So let's look at that. If they say that Thurston County is committing to spend $6.1 million on these improvements, but the permit to do the improvements is actually $2.2 million, then exactly what's going on here? And, of course, where is this money going? This is the big question. John Pettit raised this multiple times, both in writing and in public comment, and no one is able to answer this question. Where's the missing $4 million going? And why the heck are we doing $6.1 million of improvements on a $6.3 million building that we're going to be leasing and paying $2.5 million roughly a year? And especially when we know that the original permit for those same improvements is $2.2 million. This is a serious question that people have to be able to answer. And of course, the other problem that was highlighted by John, but it seems to be pretty accurate, and nobody at Thurston County can answer this question in an honest or accurate way. Why is it that Thurston County decided that they're going to break multiple state laws, and I've referenced some of them here, you can link to them down below, where they're not getting 3 bids on a large project, and instead they're just getting 1 bid. This is a no-bid contract, essentially, that they're spending all this extra money on, which is a direct violation of Washington state procurement laws, in addition to being a violation of the Thurston County procurement policies that were just signed a few years ago by these commissioners who currently are in there. And again, again, who's getting that extra $4 million? Nobody bid on it, so you have no idea what's going on. You have no idea how to compare this type of work that's being done. Again, it's absurd and ridiculous, and a typical path that Thurston County has gone down, just to squander resources with no accountability and no due diligence, and just kind of the typical way things have operated here, unfortunately, for far too long. So let's go look at the clowns who run the circus here. Let's see the people who are primarily the driving force behind the decision-making process that puts us in such a weird situation right now. And I think it's important to look at the people who are involved. So Ramiro Chavez is actually Thurston County manager. I've written about him before, numerous stories. He's been there as acting county manager since 2016, but officially I think since 2017 when he became formally full-time. He's never met a tax he didn't like. He loves taxing Thurston County residents because, after all, the nature of bureaucracy is to bloat itself. He's head of the bureaucracy in Thurston County, so there's no such thing as a limit. There's nothing more greedy than government greed, and nobody personifies this better than Thurston County manager Ramiro Chavez. In addition, Thurston County taxpayers do pay him a pretty hefty salary to squander a lot of their taxpayer dollars in his daily capacity as a county manager, so he gets paid $194,000 plus benefits. And this is the guy who's really been aggressively pushing this atrium project and the strange and what appears to be illegal bidding process that's been going on there for a while. Now, he took over from Cliff Moore, who was a former county commissioner, and I wrote an article about Cliff, and I had talked about him many times too. He was another egregious county manager. Thurston County's had a series of these for a number of years now, and they just seem to find ways to outdo the previous guy to see if they can be worse than the guy who was there before. It just seems to be the way things go. Now, the elected official that's kind of joined forces with County Manager Romero is the County Commissioner Ty Menser. He was elected in 2018. Democrats really got behind his campaign. It was kind of a big deal because they had lost all 3 seats on the county commission at the time, and it was a particularly big push to get Ty in there and to be the new county commissioner. Now, he's also never met a tax that he didn't like. That's why we called him Ty, the big tax guy. He likes high taxes, and that is something that he just seems to endlessly push at all opportunities as well. And of course, taxpayers pay him about $131,000 a year, which is and plus benefits. So it's no small amount of money that's being given to any of these guys that are in charge of squandering all this extra money on this atrium project. Now, it's kind of worth going through some more background on Ty because it puts this in context just a little bit better. Now, he claims that he graduated from Harvard. I've never seen any evidence that he did, but he does claim that he graduated from Harvard, and he claims to have a law degree from Berkeley as well. And the reason why I point that out is that despite that background, I don't know if it just means that a Harvard degree and a Berkeley College degree just clearly don't mean as much as they used to, or perhaps he just partied his way through school and didn't really learn anything and just got the piece of paper going out the door at those institutions as a consolation prize. But regardless of how he ended up down here in Thurston County as county commissioner, he repeatedly and endlessly seems completely incapable of recognizing some of the most egregious legal advice I've ever seen given to elected officials. Like, no matter how incompetent, how bad it really is, he just can't help himself and agree with it. He just does that all the time, as though he doesn't have a law degree or even has the ability to think for himself, which is strange considering the theoretical background that he claims to have in this situation. It just doesn't make any sense when you see how it's been working there. So although the Democrats love Ty, the high tax guy, as county commissioner, his combination of either legal ignorance and complete incompetence or just unwillingness to pay attention to what's actually happening, in combination with county manager Ramiro, has created a very wasteful environment and a very dangerous environment for the taxpayers in Thurston County. But of course, they're not alone. They need legal cover for a lot of these bad decisions that they're making, and nobody gives them legal cover better than an attorney called Elizabeth Petrich, who's about as bad as any attorney has been. Now, the quality of attorneys that tend to get assigned to local government is usually pretty poor. Elizabeth Petrich appears to have gotten this job, in my opinion, because her dad was a very well-known, very respected judge in the community, and sometimes the law, the idea is that you have a lot of respect for for the dad, I guess. Maybe his daughter knows what she's doing, and she clearly doesn't. She's really been a disaster as attorney. And unfortunately, the county commissioners have to use the attorney that's provided to them by the county prosecutor. And Elizabeth Petrich has filled this role now for a long, long time. Whatever it is that they pay her is too much. It's really, she's a net loss to the community in a sense of how much money she has repeatedly cost the county with some of the worst legal advice ever given. There was a time, I got to double check these now, but of the top 20 judgments that have been issued against county governments in the risk pool that Thurston County is involved in, 6 of them were from Thurston County, and a good percentage of those were based on legal advice given by her, including the Maytown decision, which was a more recently well-known one of about $12 million judgment against the county, very specifically based on the legal advice that Elizabeth Petrich has given them. And nobody seems to be holding her accountable. And usually this legal advice is given in what's called executive session, which means you can't see just how bad that legal advice is. You can only judge from the consequences of the decisions that the elected officials make based on legal advice given. However, a little while ago, I did this video. It's an article here on my website as well that links to the video, that I actually was able to capture some of her legal advice given for just some basic, simple, run-of-the-mill Open Public Meetings Act advice at the time. And you can see in the video, it speaks for itself, and she speaks for herself as she gives this egregious and completely ignorant and totally wrong legal advice to them, where she misreads the law, isn't familiar with the penalties, doesn't even know what she's talking about, and confuses herself and the elected officials at the same time. So you're not getting, nobody's getting any good results when you have this group of people combining together and colluding together to produce decisions like we see with the Atrium building unfolding before us, just an inevitable disaster. However, not everybody who works at a senior management level in Thurston County is egregiously incompetent or a criminal or corrupt, not all of them. And it's important to highlight that the checks and balances that you need in government sometimes are represented by just a handful of people. Gary Edwards, most significantly, is an elected official, another county commissioner, has consistently, for the most part, been able to oppose Ty Mentzer and a lot of these disastrous ideas and projects that they've been trying to push on the taxpayers of Thurston County for a while. He is the former sheriff. He's serving his second term as county commissioner, and the voters of Thurston County are very fortunate to have him there, the taxpayers in particular. He has saved them millions and millions of dollars just by being a simple check on the foolish decisions and incompetent moves that seem to be made by staff. But he does get outvoted frequently, and this is one of the challenges that we have in Thurston County. However, what's kind of an interesting opportunity here is that Commissioner Gary Edwards has run as an independent for a long time. He's more conservative, and he's an independently elected official. Ty Mentzer's a Democrat. Carolina Mejia, who is the other elected official, she was elected in 2020, first time in office, she has probably been a little bit of a disappointment, I think, to some of the Democrats who felt that she was just going to go full woke and support any stupid idea that they had, regardless of how ridiculous that it was. And I think sometimes this comes down to the way Democrats oftentimes approach people who have become naturalized citizens. Mejia is originally from Honduras. She's become a naturalized citizen since she's been in America before she was elected to office. And what's interesting about this background, I think, and what's made her a better commissioner than Ty Mentzer, for example, is I think she still has some common sense and ability to do math. I don't know if that's just the background that you would have coming from another culture, another country, I don't know. But whatever it is, she has taken some legitimate votes and been willing to join with Gary Edwards on certain issues and surprising decisions at times that I think the Democrats were surprised with, and I've been pleasantly surprised to see somebody who's occasionally able to think for themselves. At this point in time, she appears to have attached her, hitched herself to Ty Mentzer's fiascos associated with this Atrium facility. But it's always possible, and she's kind of the swing vote, who may decide to come in and actually start making some common sense decisions that Thurston County desperately needs, especially when they're facing the kind of situation they're facing right now. So the Atrium facility is just the latest in a long string of issues and problems, but it does raise a number of questions that I think all of us need to ask. And if it applies in Thurston County, you're probably having similar situations happen wherever you live. One of the first questions in Thurston County that must be asked is exactly what is happening to the missing $4 million that nobody seems to be able to explain right now. I'd like to know the answer to that, and I bet you would as well. Why is Thurston County staff and this one elected official, especially Commissioner Menser, so bound and determined to just break the law, no matter what law it is, to get this project going? It just seems like there's an obsession here that doesn't make any sense, considering the fact they would have other options, most of which are probably better choices. And finally, can anyone cure the staph infection in Thurston County? Now, I consider this a senior staff infection with the upper management, not necessarily entry-level workers, but it's one of those problems that has been ongoing for a while. It takes a lot of time and energy to clean up a bureaucracy that's this far out of control. So if you want to learn more about anything that I've mentioned related to this story today, I've got a lot of source links down below, a lot of historical articles and videos related to some of the background references that I've made in this video. Feel free to go to wethegovern.com, go to the source links that I have down below, and look at those. And the other points that I want to make, and I don't want people to forget about this, the only way we'd even know about some of these issues is because somebody local is willing to show up, like John Pettit. Somebody who's willing to actually get in there and do the work, do the research, and find this information so the rest of us can know the truth about what's happening in our communities. Every community needs somebody like this, and preferably a team of people like it, because in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.